The sun had already begun its descent, casting a warm golden light across the sprawling mansion. Inside, everything was perfectly in place, just as it always was. The floors gleamed, the furniture was polished to perfection, and the aroma of freshly cooked food drifted through the air. In the kitchen, a quiet hum filled the space, where a dedicated maid worked, making sure the house ran like a well-oiled machine. The millionaire, a man in his mid-40s, stepped out of his car and approached the grand front door. He had been traveling for business as usual, and had been away for several days. His work took him across cities and sometimes countries, but the mansion and the life he had built always awaited him. He often thought of his house as a sanctuary, a place to return to after the hustle and bustle of high-stakes meetings and endless phone calls. His schedule rarely allowed for any break, and if he were honest, he didn't mind. He thrived on the pressure, the long hours, the constant demands. His success depended on it. Yet despite his wealth and power, there was a feeling of emptiness that had been lingering. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was there, gnawing at him from the inside. He knew he had everything, money, prestige, a beautiful home, but something was missing. He had no time to focus on what that something was. Instead, he buried himself deeper into his work, ignoring any thoughts of dissatisfaction or longing that might arise. The millionaire lived a life that many would envy. He owned several high-end cars, traveled first class, and had a beautiful mansion with enough space to get lost in. Every part of his life was designed for success. He had a personal assistant who managed his appointments, a driver who took him wherever he needed to go, and a maid who kept the house spotless, organized, and running smoothly. He had all the trappings of success, but what most people didn't know was that he had become increasingly disconnected. There was no one to share his success with, no one who truly understood him beyond the role he played as a businessman. His maid, on the other hand, was a quiet presence in the house, a woman who had been working for him for several years. She knew the house like the back of her hand, every nook and cranny, every detail. She had become part of the household rhythm, helping with everything from cleaning to preparing meals to handling minor errands. To the millionaire, she was simply a worker, a reliable one, but little more than that. He never took the time to know her story, nor did he wonder what her life outside of the mansion was like. He knew she had a family, that she had worked in other homes before, but he never asked much beyond the basics. In fact, he often saw her as a necessary part of the equation. Without her, the house would fall apart, he reasoned. She made everything run smoothly, like the unseen gears of a well-functioning machine. He didn't have to worry about her personal life or anything else as long as she did her job well. It wasn't that he was unkind to her, far from it. He was polite, respectful even, but his interactions with her were limited to professional exchanges. It wasn't like he had time to think about much else, but on this particular day, something felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the trip or the pressure of an upcoming meeting. But the millionaire found himself wanting to go home a little earlier than expected. He had planned on staying another day, but something told him it was time to return. He wasn't sure why, but the idea of walking through the doors of his mansion, of sitting down in his favorite chair with a glass of scotch, sounded better than any business deal at that moment. As he entered the house, he noticed that it was quieter than usual. Normally, he could hear the faint hum of activity, his maid in the kitchen, or perhaps the sound of the vacuum moving across the floor. But today there was only silence. He took off his jacket, hung it up in the hallway, and made his way through the grand foyer. The house felt strangely still, almost empty, despite all its wealth and grandeur. Curious, he moved toward the kitchen, expecting to see his maid at work, but instead, he found her sitting at the table, holding a letter in her hands. She wasn't moving, her head slightly lowered, deep in thought. The sight of her in such a quiet, reflective state was unusual. He couldn't recall a time when she had been anything but efficient, always focused on her duties, never taking a moment to pause. He stood for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should he disturb her? But then again, he had never seen her like this before. Usually she was in motion, busy, preparing dinner, cleaning, or handling something else that needed attention. This stillness felt odd. Finally, after a few seconds, he cleared his throat. "Is everything all right?" His voice was a little softer than usual, as if the calmness in the room had affected him too. She looked up, a faint but steady look in her eyes. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze that made the millionaire pause. It wasn't just routine politeness, it was something deeper. A kind of awareness that caught him off guard. She slowly put the letter down on the table. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, her voice calm yet firm. There was no tremor, no hesitation. The millionaire wasn't sure what to expect, but he certainly hadn't expected this. She wasn't usually the type to initiate conversation, at least not beyond the typical exchanges about meals or cleaning schedules. For a moment, the millionaire didn't know how to respond. He stood there awkwardly, trying to read her expression, but it was as though she was holding back something, waiting for the right moment to speak. He was used to taking control of situations, managing his life with precision, but this felt different. He was no longer in control. "What's going on?" he asked, his curiosity now piqued. The maid took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been working here for many years, and I've been watching your life. I see how hard you work, how much you give to your business, how much you sacrifice, but I also see something else." She paused, as if considering her words carefully. "You've built a perfect life for yourself, but I don't think you've truly stopped to look at it. I don't think you see the emptiness behind all the success." The millionaire was taken aback. He had always prided himself on his accomplishments. He had worked tirelessly to create this life, to amass his wealth, and to ensure everything was always in perfect order. What did she mean by emptiness? It didn't make sense, but the maid didn't wait for him to respond. She continued, her tone even but resolute. "You've built this mansion, you've traveled the world, you've made a name for yourself, but it's all been for the wrong reasons. You're chasing something that will never fill the void inside you." The millionaire blinked, unsure of what to make of her words. Was she really telling him this? A woman who cleaned his floors, cooked his meals, and did all the work that kept the house running was now telling him that he was living a lie. He felt a strange mix of confusion and defensiveness welling up inside him. But before he could say anything, she added, "I don't want to leave without telling you this. I've been saving money for a while now. I've made enough to go start my own life, one where I can do something for myself, not just for others. I don't want to stay in a place where I'm just a worker. I've watched you and I see that you've given everything to your business, but you've forgotten how to live. Maybe you'll never realize it, but you have everything, and nothing at the same time." With those words, she stood up, ready to walk away. She had said what she needed to say. Now it was up to the millionaire to process it. He stood there speechless as she turned and walked out of the kitchen. The weight of her words sank deep into his chest, and for the first time in years he felt an unfamiliar sensation. Doubt. The millionaire stood there, frozen in the kitchen, holding on to the words the maid had just spoken. Her voice still echoed in his mind, each sentence like a small wave crashing over him, slowly breaking down the carefully constructed walls he had built around his life. He glanced at the letter she had left on the table, still untouched. The silence in the house seemed to grow louder with every passing second. It was almost as if the walls themselves were waiting for him to respond, to make sense of the situation. But he couldn't. His mind was racing, his thoughts spinning in circles. What did she mean by emptiness? How could she say that his life was a lie? For years he had prided himself on the life he had created. His wealth, his success, his business empire, it all seemed to be a reflection of his hard work, his ambition, his ability to rise above the challenges life had thrown his way. He had built it all with his own hands, and to him that was something to be proud of. But now, in the quiet of his own home, the words of someone who had worked for him for years had shaken him to his core. Had he really been living a lie all this time? Was the life he had built really so hollow? The questions lingered in his mind as he picked up the letter she had left behind. It was folded neatly, almost as if she had placed it there intentionally for him to find. As he unfolded it, he noticed the care with which it had been written, the careful choice of words. It wasn't just a simple letter. It was something more, something personal, something revealing. He started reading, each line pulling him deeper into a world he had never fully considered. The maid's words were not just about her own dreams and desires, but they were also a mirror reflecting his own life. She spoke about the dreams she had when she was younger, dreams that she had pushed aside for years as she worked to support her family. She wrote about the sacrifices she had made, the quiet moments of reflection when she wondered if there was more to life than just working for someone else. She had always wanted more, but like many, she had put her own desires on hold, waiting for the right time, the right moment to make a change. As he continued reading, the millionaire felt an overwhelming sense of guilt wash over him. In many ways, he had been living for the future, The next big deal, the next business venture, the next goal to reach. But what had he been doing in the present? Had he been so focused on the next achievement that he had forgotten to live in the moment? Had he sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of success? The maid had written about her own realization, the moment when she decided she had enough. She had been saving for years, not for a rainy day or a fancy vacation, but for something more meaningful, her freedom. She wanted a life where she could make her own choices, live without the weight of obligation, and build something for herself. The millionaire couldn't help but admire her courage. It wasn't easy to walk away from a job that provided security, especially when it had become a routine for so long. But she had done it. She had chosen herself over the safety of the familiar. And now, here he was, staring at the same crossroads, but this time the choice wasn't as clear. What did he want? Had he built his empire only to find that it was an empty shell? Was it too late to make a change? His mind was filled with a flood of questions, and the answers seemed just out of reach. As he sat at the kitchen table, still holding the letter in his hands, he realized that he had been so consumed by the pursuit of success that he had never stopped to think about the kind of person he had become. He had always been focused on the outward signs of success, wealth, power, and recognition. But now, with the maid's words ringing in his ears, he realized that those things didn't define him. What mattered was what was inside, what kind of person he was when no one was watching. When the meetings were over and the contracts signed, he thought back to the times when he used to visit his parents before his career took off. Back then, life had been simpler. His mother had always been there to make sure he ate well, to listen to his worries, and to remind him of the things that truly mattered. His father had taught him the value of hard work, but also the importance of balance. He had learned to take pride in his achievements, but also to find joy in the small things, like a family dinner or a walk in the park. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those lessons. The endless pursuit of success had pulled him away from the people and the things that truly mattered. Now, sitting alone in his kitchen, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The maid had been right. He had been living a life that wasn't truly his. He had allowed himself to be swept up in the pursuit of things that didn't bring him true happiness. He had sacrificed relationships, personal well-being, and even his own peace of mind, all in the name of success. He glanced at the clock. It was late, but he knew he couldn't sleep until he figured this out. He needed to talk to someone, to figure out what had happened to the person he used to be. He stood up, pacing the kitchen floor. He needed to call his family to apologize for the distance he had put between them. He needed to make amends for the years he had spent chasing after something that didn't matter as much as he had believed. And then, just as he was about to pick up the phone, he heard a soft knock at the door. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door cautiously, wondering who it could be. To his surprise, it was the maid. She was standing there, a small bag in her hand, looking more serene than he had ever seen her. She smiled gently, but it was clear she wasn't there to talk about her decision to leave. She had already made that choice. "I wanted to thank you for listening," she said quietly. "I know I didn't have to say anything, but I couldn't leave without telling you how I felt." The millionaire nodded, his throat tight. "I don't know what to say. You've given me a lot to think about, more than I've ever thought about in a long time." The maid's smile deepened. "I didn't want to leave on bad terms, and I certainly didn't want to make you feel guilty. But sometimes, the truth can only be spoken when it's least expected. I just hope it helps you see things differently. You have everything, but what's the point if you're not truly happy? Take time for yourself. There's more to life than just working." With those final words, she turned and walked away. This time there was no hesitance, no looking back. She had said her piece, and now it was up to him to figure out what to do with it. The millionaire watched her disappear into the night, feeling a sense of finality. He stood there silent, reflecting on everything that had just transpired. In that moment, something shifted within him. He realized that it wasn't too late. He could still change, still reclaim the parts of himself that he had lost along the way. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find the happiness and fulfillment he had been searching for all along. The millionaire stood at the door, the evening air cool against his skin, the weight of the maid's words still pressing heavily on him. She had walked away without a second glance, leaving him alone in the vast, quiet space of his home. The house, which once seemed like a fortress of comfort and achievement, now felt strangely empty, as if it too were waiting for him to make sense of the conversation they had just had. He closed the door gently and leaned against it, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What had just happened? Why did it feel like something had shifted inside him? For the first time in years, he was questioning everything. The life he had built, the choices he had made, the path he had followed. He had spent so much time chasing success, trying to prove himself, thinking that wealth and power would somehow fill the hole inside him. But the maid's words had cut through all of that like a sudden, unexpected truth. He couldn't stop thinking about her. She had always been there in the background, just a part of the household routine. But today, she had become something else entirely. A mirror reflecting back at him the life he had been avoiding. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone who had stopped and asked herself the tough questions about her life. She had made the decision to take control, to stop living for others and start living for herself. And now she was walking away, choosing to live a life that felt true to her. As the silence of the house crept back in, he felt a rising tension. He didn't know what he was supposed to do next. Should he try to find her? Talk to her again? He felt this sudden urge to apologize, to ask her to stay, but then he paused. He realized something. The truth was he didn't need her to stay in order to change. The change had to come from within him. The maid's departure had stirred something in him that had been dormant for far too long. He had been so caught up in his own world of meetings and deals that he had failed to see the very things that mattered most. And now here he was, standing alone in his grand home with everything he had ever wanted and still feeling empty. He walked slowly to his study, the familiar walls of books and trophies surrounding him like old friends. He had built this room to reflect his success, books filled with knowledge, trophies to showcase his victories, and artwork that told the story of his rise. But as he sat down in his favorite chair, looking at the familiar objects, they didn't bring him the comfort they once did. They just reminded him of what he had sacrificed to get them. The more he thought about the maid's words, the clearer it became. He had been living for the wrong things. He had built an empire to prove himself, but in doing so, he had forgotten to live. The mansion, the cars, the luxurious vacations, none of it had ever brought him the sense of fulfillment he had hoped for. And now, as he looked around, he realized that he had been running away from the one thing that could truly make him happy: connection. He had pushed people away for years. Family, friends, even colleagues. He had kept everyone at arm's length, focusing only on his career. He had told himself that he was too busy, too important to spend time with others. But in reality, he had been afraid that if he stopped even for a moment, he would lose everything he had worked so hard for. He had become so obsessed with success that he had forgotten what truly mattered. He had isolated himself, thinking that he could fill the emptiness with work. But the emptiness was still there, and it had only grown bigger over time. As the minutes passed, he found himself reflecting on the people he had left behind. His family, especially, had always been there for him, but he had taken them for granted. His parents, who had supported him through thick and thin, had grown old without him truly noticing. He hadn't spent enough time with them, and now he realized how much he had missed. They had always been the ones to remind him that there was more to life than just success. They had taught him about balance, about the importance of relationships, about the beauty of simple moments. And yet, he had neglected those lessons, chasing after something that, in the end, hadn't brought him happiness. He picked up his phone, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed his mother's number. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, comforting, just like it had always been. He swallowed hard, the weight of his emotions catching in his throat. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quieter than he expected. "I've been thinking about you. About everything, really. I'm sorry I've been distant lately. I've been so caught up in everything that I forgot the things that matter most. I didn't mean to hurt you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then in the same gentle tone, she replied, "I've always known you were busy, but I've missed you. We all have. You're always welcome here, you know. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be present." Her words hit him like a ton of bricks. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be present. He had spent so many years chasing perfection, thinking that he had to have everything in order, that he had to be constantly on the move, constantly proving himself. But in doing so, he had lost the most important thing of all: connection. He felt a tear slip down his cheek. He wasn't sure why it had come, but the emotions he had been holding inside for so long were finally spilling out. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, and it was strangely comforting. It was as if a weight had been lifted and he could finally breathe again. His mother spoke again, her voice full of understanding. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm just glad to hear from you. Don't be too hard on yourself. Life is about learning, about growing. You're still young and you have time to make changes." Her words, so simple and kind, gave him the reassurance he needed. He wasn't too late. He still had time to make things right. After they talked for a while longer, the millionaire hung up the phone and sat back in his chair. The room felt different now, lighter somehow. The overwhelming sense of emptiness that had plagued him was beginning to lift, replaced by a feeling of hope. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. He knew he had a long way to go. He wasn't going to change overnight, and there were many things he would have to confront and rebuild. But today he had taken the first step. He had opened his heart to the possibility of change, and he had allowed himself to feel vulnerable, something he hadn't done in a very long time. The maid had been right. She had shown him that he needed to stop running and start living for the things that truly mattered, not just the things that society told him should matter. He didn't need to have everything figured out right away, but he knew that now at least he was willing to try. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a place where he could make real changes, where he could build the life he had always wanted but had never taken the time to create. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he was ready to face it, not as a millionaire chasing success, but as a man who was finally learning to live. The next few days passed in a blur for the millionaire. He was still trying to process everything that had happened: the unexpected visit from his maid, the letter she had left behind, and most of all, the realization that had shaken him to his core. For so long he had been trapped in a cycle of success, driven by a constant need to prove himself, to build more, achieve more, and acquire more. But in the quiet aftermath of that conversation, he realized that what he had been chasing wasn't what he truly wanted. It wasn't that he no longer cared about his business, about his accomplishments or his wealth. He had worked hard for it all, but what good was any of it if he had lost himself in the process? His mind drifted back to the words of his maid. "You can have everything and still feel like you have nothing." Those words had stayed with him, echoing in his mind every day since she left. And for the first time in a long time, he began to think about the people in his life, the relationships he had neglected in his pursuit of success. It was easy to ignore the people closest to you when you were focused on your career. It was easy to think that if you just kept working, just kept pushing forward, everything would fall into place. But now he saw things differently. The empire he had built, as impressive as it was, felt hollow. His home, full of expensive furniture and precious artifacts, suddenly seemed empty. The luxurious lifestyle that had once seemed like the ultimate goal now felt like a trap. He had spent so many years making decisions based on what would bring him the most wealth, the most recognition, and the most success. But he had never stopped to ask himself the simple question: is this what I really want? One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, the millionaire found himself standing at the window of his study, looking out over the city lights. He had always admired this view, the sparkling skyline that stretched out before him. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for. Yet, as he gazed at it now, it didn't fill him with pride or satisfaction. It was just a distant view, one that seemed to belong to someone else. He had reached the top, but in doing so, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. He had lost touch with the people who cared about him, and more importantly, he had lost touch with himself. For years, he had been too focused on the future, on the next big deal, the next promotion, the next financial milestone. But what about now? What about the present moment? Hadn't he spent enough time looking ahead, pushing himself to be better, do more, achieve more? Hadn't he earned the right to stop and reflect, to enjoy the life he had worked so hard to build? It was then that he realized that he needed to make a change. But it wouldn't be easy. Changing the way you think, the way you live, the way you relate to others. It wasn't something that could be done overnight. He knew it would take time, patience, and a willingness to let go of the old patterns that had governed his life for so long. But he also knew that it was worth it. If he wanted to live a life that was meaningful, that was truly his own, he had to start by reconnecting with the people who mattered most. The next morning, he made a phone call. It was to his parents. They hadn't heard from him in a while, and he had been avoiding their calls, too wrapped up in his own world. But now he felt it was time to reach out. He called his mother first, his heart beating a little faster as he waited for her to pick up. "Hello?" she answered, her voice warm as always. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About everything, really. I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry for that. I haven't been the son I should have been." There was a pause on the other end, but then his mother spoke, her tone filled with understanding. "I've missed you, dear. It's okay. I know you've been busy, but just remember we're always here for you. You don't have to do everything on your own." His throat tightened as he realized how much time he had missed, how much he had taken for granted. He had been so focused on building an empire that he had forgotten the people who had always been there for him. "I'm sorry, Mom," he repeated. "I promise I'm going to do better. I want to make things right." "You don't have to promise anything," she said gently. "Just remember that family is always here no matter what. We love you." That conversation was the first step. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a beginning, a start to mending the connections that had been neglected for so long. After that, the millionaire reached out to other people in his life. Friends, colleagues, even some old acquaintances he hadn't spoken to in years. He didn't expect them to immediately forgive him or to pick up where they had left off. He understood that it would take time, that rebuilding relationships wasn't something that could happen overnight. But it was important. It was the right thing to do. One evening, he even called the maid's old number. He wasn't sure if she would answer, or if she even wanted to hear from him, but he felt it was worth a try. After a few rings, someone picked up, but it wasn't her voice. It was a different woman, someone else who worked at the house now. "Hello?" the woman answered. "Hi, I was calling to speak to the former maid, the one who worked here for a while," he said, his voice unsure. "Is she still working with you?" The woman on the other end hesitated for a moment. "Oh, no, sir. She left a few weeks ago. She decided to move on and pursue her own dreams." He felt a pang of regret, a sense of loss. He had hoped for a chance to apologize to her directly, to thank her for opening his eyes. But now it seemed the chapter was closed. He didn't know where she had gone or what she was doing now, but somehow he hoped that wherever she was finding the happiness and fulfillment she had been searching for. Despite the feelings of regret, there was also a sense of gratitude. She had started something that he would never be able to forget, a process of awakening, of self-reflection. The millionaire realized that sometimes the most important lessons came from the people we least expected, and in this case it had been someone who worked for him, someone who had quietly observed his life, who had pushed him to take a hard look at himself and the choices he had made. In the weeks that followed, the millionaire found himself slowly but surely changing. His approach to work was different now, not less ambitious but more mindful. He learned to balance his drive for success with a renewed focus on the things that mattered most: his family, his friends, and his own well-being. He began spending more time at home, more time with the people who had always supported him, and less time chasing after things that didn't bring him real joy. The emptiness he had once felt slowly began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of peace. He was still the same person, still ambitious and driven, but he no longer saw success as the only measure of his worth. He had found a new sense of balance, and with it, a deeper understanding of what truly mattered in life. And as he looked out over the city from his study window one evening, the lights no longer seemed distant or disconnected. They were part of the life he had built, and now they felt like a reflection of a future he could finally look forward to with hope. The millionaire had come a long way since that fateful day when his maid had left him speechless. He had spent weeks reflecting on the words she had spoken, on the life he had built, and on the person he had become. There was no denying the fact that success had come at a price. But as he continued his journey of self-reflection, he realized that it wasn't too late to make a change. The changes in him weren't dramatic at first. There were no grand gestures, no sudden transformations. But in small, quiet moments, he began to feel the shift. He no longer woke up with a sense of dread, rushing to check his emails and jump into meetings. Instead, he began each day with a sense of purpose, not to prove himself to the world, but to prove to himself that he could live a life filled with meaning and connection. He made time for things he had long ignored. He spent weekends visiting his parents, something he hadn't done in years. He was present for family dinners, listening to his mother's stories about the old days, asking his father about his past, and just being in the moment with them. The old home he once saw as too small now felt like the most comforting place in the world. At work, things began to change too. The millionaire had always been driven by a need to build and grow, but now he was more mindful about the people around him. He reached out to his employees more often, offering support and encouragement. He took the time to listen to their concerns and ideas, something he had never done before. It wasn't just about getting results anymore. It was about building a team, fostering a sense of belonging and helping others succeed. The work culture shifted. There was a new energy in the office, one of collaboration rather than competition. People felt valued not just as employees but as individuals. He encouraged a healthy work-life balance, something that had seemed impossible in the past. He no longer saw his team as mere cogs in a machine. They were people, each with their own dreams and aspirations. This new perspective also made him rethink his business strategy. While he had always focused on maximizing profits, he began to consider how he could give back. His company started to get involved in charitable initiatives, donating time, resources, and funding to causes that mattered. He became more involved in local community projects, using his wealth and influence to make a positive impact in ways he had never considered before. He also began to take better care of himself. For years, he had neglected his health, caught up in the whirlwind of work and success. But now he made time for exercise, for meals with friends, for long walks through the park. He started to appreciate the little things: sunrises, quiet evenings, the laughter of children in the street, the warmth of a genuine conversation. His life was no longer a race to the top. It was a journey to create balance and contentment. But even as his life began to change, he still thought about the maid. She had come into his life at a time when he needed to hear the truth. And though he never saw her again, her actions had set him on a new path, one that would shape the rest of his life. He hoped that wherever she was living the life she had always dreamed of. He never forgot how her unexpected decision had been the catalyst for his transformation. One afternoon, as he sat in his office reflecting on all that had changed, he received a letter. It was handwritten, and the envelope was simple, with no return address. Curiously, he opened it. The letter was short, but it was exactly what he needed. "I hope you are doing well. I've thought about you a lot since I left, and I'm glad you're making changes. You're not the first person to get lost in the pursuit of success, and you won't be the last. But remember that you can always choose a new direction. I'm proud of you for taking the first step. You are more than what you have. I wish you peace and fulfillment." There was no signature, just a simple note. But as the millionaire read it, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't the words that mattered most, but the gesture. The maid, without even realizing it, had given him the permission he needed to change, to live a life that was true to him. And even though they had parted ways, her impact had stayed with him in a way he would never forget. The millionaire smiled to himself, placing the letter down gently. The journey wasn't over, but he was no longer the same man who had entered this story. He had learned that true success wasn't about wealth or status. It was about the relationships you build, the kindness you show, and the peace you find within yourself. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city outside his office window, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had spent so many years trying to fill an empty space with things that didn't matter, but now he was filling that space with something far more valuable: connection, purpose, and a sense of balance. And for the first time in a long time, he was finally content. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer chasing success. Instead, he was choosing to live a life that felt right for him, and that was enough.